you very much. You're all welcome. So I'll just tell you how this is going to run. I'll introduce myself. So I'm Adam. When I'm not doing this, I work for Science, a science organisation working with farmers. But I think this is the 5th year we've done this at Oxford. So we run, a few of us run a book club called Fieldwork Books. If you want to join, fieldworkbookclub@gmail.com. And it's all done on Zoom, and we started it in that terrible lockdown period when Christmas was cancelled, if you remember, and James Rebank's book had just come out at the time. So we've been doing that for about 5 years now. So how it works is, at Oxford, we do exactly what we do online, but it's in person. So we'll have a chat for probably 25 minutes, half an hour. Then we'll come to questions. Sheena's going to rove around with the mic. Then we're going to finish probably about 10 minutes before the end, so we'll do about 50 minutes. Then you're all going to go and buy a book, get it signed by Richard, if you haven't got a copy already, and then you're all going to go to the drinks reception. Perfect.
That's good.
That sound all right?
Especially the buying the book bit.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you need to do. And the only request I have is when we get to questions, let's keep them short so everybody gets a question, because I get stressed out if people are talking for too long when Richard wants to answer the question. So, anyway, Richard, give us a bit of your background for people who've thought, oh, there's a book club at Oxford, I'm going to go to that, but I've never heard of this guy or read the book.
Yeah, well, why not? You probably wouldn't have heard of me unless you're probably from Suffolk or your ex-household cavalry. So I started off my working life as a soldier in the household cavalry, and I hated London, which wasn't great. Liked horses. So when I left the army, I decided that I wanted to sell hunters for a living. Went to Leicestershire, the mecca of hunting and hedges, and the estate hedge layer there at Quenby Hall taught me how to lay hedges. And the reason why I wanted to learn hedges was not due to any burning ambition to be a conservationist or even to write books about wildlife conservation and hedgerows. It was so I could lower a few hedges, just so I could pop the horses that I was trying to sell over an easy spot, but I needed the angle so that when the punter saw it, it looked like I was jumping something that was 7 foot tall, was only 3'6". So basically it was all through that. And then after a while you learn you don't bounce anymore. I stayed in horses, I bred race horses, and my wife and I went, what on earth are we doing? I'm riding a desk now, this isn't something I wanted to do. So I went back and thought, what do I know of what to do where there might be a need? And that need, about 10, 11 years ago, was I saw the way that farming was going, is that there was this emphasis on the fact of let's go and look at what we can do for wildlife on farms. And hedgerows are one of those things. So I thought, hedgerows it is. There aren't many hedge layers in Suffolk and Norfolk or Essex, so therefore I thought, well, I can do this, and from little acorns, mighty oaks do grow. And here I sit before you all.
And so much of the book is about, well, my perception of it is, you sat with the tailgate down on the pickle with a flask of tea, surveying the scene, ready for the day ahead.
Yeah.
And your thoughts. And is that how you've written the book? Tell us a bit about how you've come to actually write it.
Yeah, well, very much so. I mean, actually, the image that's flashing up now has got on the far right, the big, tall, lanky, ugly-looking bloke, is my business partner, Richard Gould. And he and I work in blissful isolation most of the time in the middle of farmland. And when you stop because your chainsaws run out of fuel, or you just go, my back hurts too much, so we need to stop for 5 minutes, you stop and have a cup of tea. And I think one of the challenges for farmers today in particular is it's such frenetic pace. You know, one man farming 1,000 acres is quite normal beans really in Suffolk. And the amount of time you've got to sit and think. And one of the things that I always was taught when I produced young horses is that you can save £1,000 in vet fees by stopping and looking for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Just shut up and look at your livestock. And so it's in a way much the same thing, is I stop and I look back and I look at the nature around me and why that linnet is behaving the way it is. Look, there's a stone chat on there. I never realised stone chats were going to be around here. And you spot that and you see how they interact with the land about them, the work that you have just done and the farming. And you learn a huge amount. And I think things like the Big Farm and Bird Count, for example, are superb because they're encouraging farmers to stop for 10 minutes, half an hour, and just look what's around them. And I think a lot of farmers forget to do that. I'm given that luxury because my job is one of stop and start and stop and start and stop and start.
And how did you end up writing a book? How did that happen as you were sat on the back of the pickle?
Well, I'll tell you what, we've got a saying in Suffolk, which is the word squit. And squit is a politer way of sounding something that sounds like that. And I read nothing but a load of old squit that was written and spoken about hedgerows. And the British public have a surprisingly close and personal relationship with hedgerows. And yet, a lot of the time, when they see the activities of hedgerow management going on, good, bad, or indifferent, too many people getting vapours, and too many people with very loud voices, courtesy of social media, would go and sort of show a picture of a hedge that had been flailed back. And it was, do you know what really inspired me to go and write this book? Was that much the same way that Patrick Galbraith inspired me to start writing in the first place, was that people said, well, stop whinging about it. You don't just go on Twitter and go and say, you're wrong, look, here's a picture of what we're doing with this, and this is why this is the hedgerow now 6 months later, or 4 months later, whatever it might be. I thought, there's clearly a misunderstanding, and there's clearly an interest of people. And if all they're hearing is a load of negative information, let's go and turn this into a story of positivity to explain why. You know, there's a big old thing, oh, you don't understand our country ways. It's our biggest gripe, you know, as we're leaning on a gatepost. Well, actually, that's the truth. Many people don't understand our country ways. So let's try and explain and break down some myths about the hedgerow, its importance in farmland, its importance for wildlife, but also some of the brutal truths of how you can get nature recovery, how you can make biodiversity decline halt. And some of them are going to be unpalatable. But I thought, well, I want to be honest about this, and at least I can write about this from my lived working experience.
And what's been the reaction to the book? Because it's actually quite difficult. If anybody tried to buy a copy because you knew you were coming to this, you might have been a bit like me. It's actually quite difficult to get hold of a copy. So I'm presuming that means it's been successful. What's been the reaction?
Those copies there are the last hardback copies left of the first print run. And so it sold out. It was released in May, and there are none left. So, and it wasn't just because there are like 33 printed, I hasten to add. There were more. So it sold out. It became a bestseller. And the reaction has been really warming. Now, courtesy of my wife's amazing marketing skills, she got me to go to everywhere to talk about this book. And of course, so many of the places I went to were within my own tribe. You know, so there's lots of you going to the game fair, you're going to various agricultural shows and farmers clubs and farmers associations and yada yada, lots and lots of farming and lots of blokes in tweedy jackets. But also we went to places that were not that. We went to literary festivals, and we went to places where perhaps some of the topics within this might have been unpalatable. They certainly were the things that would have challenged the narrative that a lot of people would think was that of a conservationist and a naturalist and someone who professes to be extremely passionate about wildlife. And the same thing I found I got at the rather lefty folk festivals that I went to was exactly the same as the one I got to the game fair. There were people who thought, yeah, okay, I'm learning something from this, and I'm buying what he says because there's a level of authenticity. The only one bad review I've seen was...
You remembered it?
Yeah, I remember it. It's seared into my brain. But what's more seared into my brain was the fact that the amount of people from all walks of life, including one of the members of Wild Justice saying that's completely unfair, this book doesn't say that. So when you've got Wild Justice defending me, a bloke who used to earn a bit of a side hustle writing for the Shooting Times, you know you've probably landed about the right balance. So thank you, Mark Avery, because it's quite funny having Mark Avery stand up here against someone who said that he was a bloated toff, which I thought was quite amazing. I drive a Subaru, so that's about the only toff thing I've got. But also was the fact that they thought it was arrogant. And I thought, well, this isn't an arrogant book. I know that for nothing. It might have an opinion, but I believe it's an opinion which is backed up by experience and knowledge.
It's interesting when we were talking about this a bit before we came on. I sort of think this every year. We're here at the Oxford Farming Conference, but there's another conference in Oxford at the same time where they're talking about farming things. And this book would not be out of place at that conference either. So we're all sort of 2,000 people turning up in Oxford every year to talk about things. And probably most of the time, if everybody put their pitchforks down, would probably agree with each other more than they realise. And I wondered, to what extent do you think this book fits into that context? Because some of it, you know, the wild justice person that you mentioned, some of it is difficult reading depending on your perspective.
Yes, and I didn't shy away from that. And I indeed even said, you know, some people may find my views on how hard we need to control deer, for example, they may find unpalatable. They may find my correlation between farms and estates that have a decent gamekeeper and understand the principle that if you're going to release pheasants, do so sustainably, but you have got a three-legged stool of management. I was a clarion for that. My good friend Roger Morgan Grenfell wrote a brilliant book, The Return of the Grey Partridge, where he's highlighting what the Duke of Norfolk did at peppering. And that's brilliant. And it is a superb example of how you can improve farmland wildlife. And one of the drivers for that was shooting. Now, it does seem oxymoronic to some people, the fact you can work so hard to go and try and conserve and improve the numbers of these birds, that then you want to shoot them. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to slightly write along those similar lines, but I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I believe the three-legged stool model of conservation is the only sustainable model. But what I equally so was prepared to do was air the dirty washing in public of what I see the farmers who are farming right up to the hedge bottom, the people who, I've been laying hedges and I've had sprayer booms nearly hit me on the head when I'm sat in a ditch because the fella on the other side is spraying, you know, over a watercourse. I've had situations where I see people who are releasing far too many pheasants in a wood, and I've seen the complete devastation that happens there. And I think it's important that if you're going to say the good, you've also got to highlight the clear, unadulterated bad. But equally, so I'm quite prepared to go and slag off Pam Ayres because she wrote a stupid poem about the fact that every single flower mower is akin to Pol Pot. So, you know, I tried to balance the whole book, not because I'm some sat on the fence bloke with splinters in my backside, but because the fact that I think it's interesting. You've got the Oxford Farming Conference and the Real Farming Conference. No Yellowhammer has ever said thank you for having a vigilante on his side. What they want is basic protection from predators, a place to nest, and a source of food. They're not going to be increased in number due to a load of people sort of saying whether they're People's Front of Judea or the Judean People's Front.
Thinking about the writing of the book and nature writing, we'll come back onto the content in a minute. You mentioned Patrick Galbraith before, and there's an article that Kate, who's just on the front actually, sent to me, and I think it was on Scribehound, where Patrick Galbraith said something like, God, nature writing is really boring, isn't it? And we've been doing this book club for about 5 years now, and we've read some brilliant books, but we've read some really, really boring books as well. And it's difficult when you're interviewing authors because it's their thing. But you've just got to say we enjoyed it. But some of them have been boring. And some of them are essentially white man goes for a walk and tells you all about what he saw. Yes. That's essentially what a lot of nature writing is. Yeah. This, however, is different to that. So do you think that maybe, is nature writing going to change a little bit? Because we've been doing this since COVID, when, of course, everybody rediscovered the countryside. Yes. And before we know it, this is good for your health and well-being. Well, most people who come to this conference probably already knew that. Yeah. That's why they're engaged in the industry that we're in. But do you think that we live in a different world now, don't we, in the past 5 years, when there's been this explosion of nature writing? Yeah. And do you think your book sits with other books? Is it going to change?
I'm not a nature writer. I am a writer about the countryside. And I think there's a huge difference twixt the two. And you've mentioned Patrick Galbraith, his 2 books. They are not nature books. They are books about the countryside. Roger Morgan Grenfell, and of course John Lewis Stemple, who was kind enough to write the foreword. The 4 of us would never accuse ourselves of being nature writers. And I believe the difference being is that nature writers write about what they take out of the countryside. I found a leveret, I gave it a cuddle, I'm now enriched. Okay, well done you, marvellous. It's not about nature, is it? It's what you've taken out of the countryside. You might get something where, I don't like toffs, I don't like the fact they own loads of land, I'm going to go write a book about all the toffs who own land because I don't own so much land. QED, nature book, right? I think a book about the countryside is, if you read the 4, mine and Patrick's and Roger's and John's books, they are writing about what they observe, what they see, and what our impacts of putting stuff back into the land. Or if it's in Patrick's case, most of the time with him, he's talking to people who make a difference, who manage land, they take a harvest from it, but inevitably, if they're going to be successful at harvesting something, they have to put more back in than what they're taking out. So I think, fine, let's let nature writing continue, because it's nice to read about some people's lives. You know, if that walk along that salt path turns out to be a work of fiction, fine, it was still a fun read. And I don't think we should say we should stop nature writers, but I think there is another genre appearing, and you've already mentioned James probably re-kick-started that genre off, is you're actually getting people who do get their hands dirty. They have got stupid, great big calluses on their hand from a billhook, but also they're writing because they want to try and put across the narrative that just cuddling hares ain't going to make a lot of difference to it, you know? And I think that there is a gulf, there is a difference between the two, and it'll be interesting to see that grow.
So let's say over the past 10 years, the book is, I'm paraphrasing really, but the culmination of the work that you've done. A lot's happened, and I often think when we're thinking about the future of agriculture, and here we are at the conference, 90 years of the Oxford Conference, and it's always the start of the year and the look forward. What do you think about the future? It's a big question, but the future of the countryside based on what you've seen? Because you'll have seen land use change, you've seen policy change, I'm sure we'll get into politics shortly. You know, what does it look like in the future? Because you've been seeing it at first hand.
Do you know what? 2 years ago, I had such hopes, because it wasn't just that I was seeing nature improving, bird count numbers going up. I was seeing more and more and more hedges, because I'd get someone to send me a WhatsApp. You've been laying a hedge out at such and such. No, that's not one of mine. And that meant that somebody else was doing it. And you'd see all this bit working. And, you know, you go to Groundswell 9-10 years ago, and it was sort of a bunch of hippies. And then you go more recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, there's a bloke from Velcourt over there. Oh, look, there's one of the big guys from Frontier. And there were people suddenly realizing that we had to do things differently, that to be sustainable, part of that sustainability was the fact of how we looked after, in my world, the hedges, the edges, the wetlands, the woods. That became part and parcel of farming, not just something 1 or 2 farmers, the Barkers, would do at Westhorpe, or a duke could do because he could afford it. It was becoming a norm. And I could see that, and there was my order book was filled up, but also there was a goodwill, you know, and I would get asked to go to even sort of agricultural machinery dealerships to go and give them a talk about hedge laying, which seemed bonkers, you know. The last, yes, okay, this is political. Since when that goodwill went on, when Daniel Zeitner stood over my shoulder and watched me lay a hedge, right, at the Barkers, and old David Barker, who's been chairman of the Conservative Party in Suffolk for I don't know how long, said, I can work with that man. And I thought, I can work with that man. What a good egg he is. And then that was washed away. And I can remember seeing Daniel Zeitner's face, and he looked at me and he sort of, and I don't think he's a dishonest man. I think he's a very honest man. And I think that he was told by people up high that all of a sudden the things that were passionate, meant a passionate thing to him, nature, as much as perhaps to me, but it certainly meant a lot to him. I think he had suddenly had that snatched away, and he had to take it away from me. And all these farmers who had climbed all the way up to that, nearly the top of the hill, and then they all came tumbling down again. So what's the future look like? Well, I think it's bloody grim, to be perfectly honest, because the problem is that when you've changed policy and the ongoing policies and the slashes in budgets and the complete hunkering down that's happened, you can't just turn a tap off on nature and then turn it back on and that'll be back there again. It won't. And I'm afraid that all those numbers that we see go up, I fear that we're going to see them plummet back down again. People are going to stop feeding. They're going to take out them beetle banks. They're not going to bother managing those hedges that we put in so that they're punching above their weight. They're not going to have those little strips and little pockets of wildlife habitat that are connected together by my hedgerows. They're all going to go. And when that all goes, you can't just click your fingers and here's a new government, it's all back again. We'll have to start back. So we're not just going to go back 5 years. We're going to go back the best part of 15, 20 years and start all over again. And that feels morally utterly wrong.
I think we're lining up some questions. So I'm looking around the room. We're going to come to questions shortly. But we do have a more positive bit because you were going to read something before we go to questions from the book.
Well,
which is a slightly more positive slant.
This is a positive slant, and I tell you the positive slant is that it's all well and good for me going writing this book, right? To go and say, well, this is what we need to do, you know, and I can say, well, if we got it all right, and if only you go and have me to lay your hedges, it'll be wonderful. But I'm 55 now, and my back is showing the effects of not only, I don't know how many falls off bad horses, but also far too long laying hedges. And so therefore it is a rather careworn thing. So therefore the Suffolk Agricultural Association have stepped up and they have something which I think is extremely good. And I want to read you a bit about that because it's something that I'm involved with. And I think it is something to look on, bright lights on the horizon. Where shall I start? At the dot of 9 o'clock, I see the first group of children make their way towards me. They remind me of a litter of foxhound puppies, all babbling, pushing and shoving one another, rough but with no evil intent. Their teacher claps her hands and the racket ends abruptly. She turns and treats me to a smile of genuine pleasure. We recognise one another, meeting on this day each year for the past 4. The Suffolk Schools Farm and Country Fair at Trinity Park is an institution well loved by teachers, children and exhibitors alike. Over 100 Suffolk primary schools send their pupils to this event, organised and run by the Suffolk Agricultural Association. Here, they hear about food, farming and the countryside from the mouths of farmers, deer stalkers, beekeepers, naturalists and a solitary hedge layer. And this is the first stand of the day for the jolly teacher and her class of 8 and 9-year-olds. By 2 o'clock, I know her smile will be well worn. Herding cats is tiring, even for experienced hands like hers. Good morning, everyone, which is actually the voice I do genuinely use when I'm speaking to these children because I want to be a BBC children's presenter. I say to the upturned semicircle of faces, my name is Richard, and I'm a hedge layer. Where are you from? 12 voices reply in a jumbled, high-pitched chant. I only catch the last word, school. I turn to the teacher, who smiles again and says, Woodbridge. I wave at the hedge on my left. What's this, then? I ask the children generally. 11 hands immediately shoot skywards. One stays lowered. The 12th child is distracted. He watches a gun dog training demo in the distance. Labrador's jumping gaits are understandably more entertaining than hedges and pleaches. I point at a little girl. Her hair is coiled in elaborate plaits for her answer, and I see she wears a replica Ipswich Town FC shirt. This is promotion year for the tractor boys, and their fan base is widening. Her blue wellies are decorated with green frogs holding brollies. They make me smile. She has them wedged on the wrong feet. A bush, she replies. No, not quite, I say. Trees, answers a little boy sporting an Ipswich Town tracksuit. No, not trees. Leaves. says another one. He goes against the grain hereabouts, and he wears a black beanie hat with an Arsenal badge. No, not quite. The Gundog fan turns around. A hedge, he states matter-of-factly. I note his sweatshirt sports a John Deere tractor emblazoned on the midriff. Yes, I enthuse, punching my right fist into my left palm. My exuberance spooks the audience, and the front row steps back half a stride. They bump into the rank behind, surprised that this odd, tall man in overalls is so excited about a mundane, leafy line of things that look like small trees. I persevere, telling them why we have hedges on farms and how we manage them and what benefits they bring for wildlife and how they ensure we have healthy food on our plates. I ask them what mammals they think live in a hedge, and their replies are eclectic. Some are obvious: mice, rabbits, snakes. Others leave me bemused. Cats, says one little girl at the back. I have a cat called Ruby, she adds confidentially, as if imparting scandalous gossip. One is a spiky little animal, I add as a clue, and John Deere finally gives me the answer I seek. Hedgehogs, he announces. Yes! I warm to my subject. Even their name reveals their preferred home, doesn't it? And why would a thick, dense hedge be better for hedgehogs, I ask. My audience pauses briefly. Then, like Roman senators, all raise their hands. They don't like the rain, says one boy, his Ipswich Town baseball cap too large for his head. They eat blackberries, another little girl answers, her clothes revealing allegiance to neither football club nor tractor manufacturer. She prefers Taylor Swift. And what if a hedge provides protection from being eaten? What might like to eat a hedgehog, I query. And this draws the gang up short. It's apparent they can't imagine anything want to crunch through all those sharp spines, and anyway, in their gentle world of animal stories, the hedgehogs are little friends to all. They have yet to learn that true nature is far removed from the thing they read about in books. Real nature is a terrifying episodes of eating or being eaten. I help the kids to find the right answer to the hedgehog's foe. It's black and white, I add, and the hands go up. Zebra, says one. Skunk, says another. No, not skunks or zebras. They don't even live in Britain, I begin to plead. What else is black and white and is a predator? Willing the right answer out of the class. Finally, the smallest boy in the front row raises his hand half-heartedly, a motion that could be passed off as a hair adjustment. Is it a badger? He quavers. Yes, I say badgers eat hedgehogs. In the thick of the hedge, the more chance a hedgehog has of escaping. I realised my question and answer session wasn't as fascinating for the children as it was enlightening for me. I grab my planting spade and the hawthorn whip. Right. Who wants to help me plant a hedge and give the hedgehogs a new home, I ask. 12 hands shoot up, and I give the spade to the little boy who knows what a badger is.
Let's have some questions. Let's see some hands before I pick on people.
No, I didn't do it.
Just down here at the front, Sheena.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I haven't read your book yet, but I will.
There's copies at the back.
Copies at the back. Signed or unsigned.
So I remember as a child, my father tried to teach me hedge
Yeah.
laying, and we did it for a number of years on our farm. But I'm not sure that we do it anymore, and I think the main reason for that has been automation, and the fact that we've got, just so much automation. Do you not think that that's the main reason that this is now a dying art?
Yes, utterly. And there's an entire chapter, actually, dedicated to the flail, which came on the market immediately after the Second World War, when we were suddenly going for maximum production. And it certainly has. And indeed, the other reason why hedge laying died out was because we've got barbed wire and we've got electric fencing. So therefore, as a stock-proofing medium, we lost that need to create that impenetrable barrier. But thanks to the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, and no other charity did this research, they have their research farm at Loddington. And it was almost a happenstance. They still were laying hedges there, and they were saying, well, that hedge has more yellowhammers and linnets nesting than that one does. Why is the reason that? One of their MSc students did the first bit of research. Roger Drake then took it over, and they realised that that low basal density where so many of the farmland species are nesting isn't up there. Yes, the old bullfinch likes up there, the turtle dove right up there, but the vast number of them, they want a thicker, denser hedge, which has got this basal density. So that perfect hedge that stops lamb creep or a bullock from going, I want to go that side, was also the perfect hedge for wildlife. So all of a sudden, the hedgerows role within the farm landscape, it suddenly had another role. And their flail is a superb tool when used right. And thankfully, the previous government brought in an incremental cutting grant that encourages you to almost recreate the old how you used to side up hedges with a slasher. And that incrementally lets you get that hedge so it's bigger and thicker because they need regular trimming to get that thickness and density, fruit on the inside, yada, yada, yada. But you have to build that framework through the medium of either laying or if they've gone past marker mouth by coppicing. So those interventions, those old ancient skills have now suddenly got a modern usage. And I think, as you correctly point out, they died out, but they died out almost for 2 generations, since 1946 when the first McConnell flail came about, and so it's almost having to relearn that. So I'm not only just talking to the youngsters at the Suffolk Schools Farm Fair, I'm also going around to as many of the young farmers clubs as I can in my region, because I think there's opportunities there for young people in farming, perhaps those who don't have farms or they're not going to be directly farming themselves, to get involved, because it's such an important thing for wildlife, but it's also so beneficial for the farm.
Thank you. Is there anything that you can say about hedges in the kind of built environment? And I guess I'm thinking particularly villages and where I live, which there's huge amounts of house building. And what they do is remove the nice hedge and put up a neat fence. Is that anything?
Yes, it's interesting. And I think it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent because, like you say, is that villages are expanding. For some bizarre reason, the decision has been made near us to keep expanding villages and not using all that empty brown space that used to be called the High Street in Stowmarket. They decided to go and build on the edge of villages. And we are losing that habitat. And because they've made so many people move out of urban conurbations, we're going to put you in this satellite village that's out here. Well, we aren't going to obviously get a bus service, so therefore you're going to have 2 cars. So possibly that front garden that used to have that had a big old hedge that then linked into the one that went out the back and then onto farmland has been grubbed out because it's got to make way for the 2/3 cars that are essential. Otherwise you're isolated in this village in the middle of nowhere. So how do you go and get that back? Well, I think there's 3 things. One, it's great if we had these wonderful hedges in gardens and whatnot. But if you've got a cat, all you've done is you provided a bird table for the domestic cat. So therefore, there is an argument that let's make planning and how we actually link properties with the proper green belt, the farmland behind it, put more thinking into how that back garden links into something. Because I'm just concerned is that if we attract wildlife to areas that are pinch points with lots of dogs, cats, lots of human beings in, it's great to have all that wildlife there, but is it great for the wildlife? You know, I see so often people go and say, oh, look what the farmer's done to this hedge along this road. And I think, good, thank goodness for that. Thank God he smashed it back, because I don't want that habitat right next to that busy old road being an absolutely attractive place for bats or for yellowhammers or linnets or insects, because they're just going to get wiped out by cars, trucks and whatnot. So I'm not an urban planner and I'm not a landscape architect, but I think that we are losing hedgerows and we are losing green spaces within the built environment. But I think really what we need to do is think a lot harder about how we're building in villages and a lot more about how perhaps we can go and make sure that people can live in towns where they can do all the things that they need to do, go to work, da-da-da-da-da-da, and leave the countryside for agriculture and for wildlife. That's my slightly left field view, is that we've lost it already. As soon as you put that ridiculous housing estate called Skylark Meadow, which always seems to be the thing. Oh, yeah. Fieldwork Court, that was one there. Peewit, I thought that was a really embarrassing one. There used to be Peewits on there. There's now, 14 mock Georgian 5-bedroom things with no hedges in. But a lapwing wouldn't go back there anyway. So I'm not good enough or knowledgeable enough to say how you can put the green lung back into urban environments, but I think stop urbanizing rural environments would be my first.
Just at the front there. Oh no, at the front first, and then Rob at the back.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed the talk very much. I'm just wondering about this decline that you were talking about over the last couple of years, and is that because of the withdrawal of SFI and stuff like that you've had in England, and how do you think that could or should be reversed? Is that about public money? Is it about private money? Is it about profitability? Where do you think the answer might be if you had the opportunity to try and fix that?
I think, yes, very much so. First of all, to answer your question, is where that has gone off is because, the APR situation had a massive kick because all of a sudden people no longer had any spare cash down the back of the tractor seat. So that took liquidity out of it. Losing BPS so precipitously, that took even more liquidity out of farm businesses. And then the SFI disappearing or getting changed, it's here, it's there, it's not again, it is, we don't know what's going on. It took all confidence out. So it was a number of levels. So government, I believe, has failed to give any reassurance or forward planning ability to farmers. And let's be perfectly honest, 70% of our land mass is farmland, and that's where nature recovery happens. It does not happen on a reserve, right? It has to happen in farmland. That's the only way we're ever going to see it. Second thing, how do we go and fund it? Well, our farm cluster is part funded by Nestle. And Nestle have done quite a brave thing. They're not just putting money, they're not putting a value on oilseed rape that's grown more environmentally friendly, or things that directly help them. Oh, look, this wheat is better. What they're actually doing is they're putting the value on the fact that we have more yellowhammers, we have more linnets, we have baseline surveyed the entire cluster. I know exactly how many kilometres of hedgerows we have on the 6,500 hectares of the High Suffolk Farm Cluster. So we have that bottom baseline data. And a lot of the whistles and bells that we wanted to do is now getting funded by private enterprise. And we've had to do that by showing the data. So I think there is very much a place for some of the wondrous things that we've done, the left field things or the nice to haves. This will put the icing on the cake, has been funded by private investment. The government really just needs to wake up to the thing I said first of all, is you can't turn the tap off. You can't turn the tap off on nature because I don't think they necessarily want to. I think they were unsighted. And I think their silly equation of you own a lot of land, QED, you're rich, has now realised actually we cocked that one up. And so therefore I think what we do need to do is we as farmers and people who work for farmers, we need to baseline survey our farms, show them what wildlife we've got there, so we can show the efficacy of the fact that a laid hedge, before I laid it, there were this many nests in it. Afterwards, that. If we're looking at public money for public goods, like Gove originally said, well, then we can show that if we consider a public good is that we have more yellowhammer numbers, which were at the time red listed, now amber listed, that we've got more, so your public money is actually working. And I think we're crap at doing our baseline surveying, and we're not actually very good even at saying, well, what have we done? We do it, lay a hedge, walk away, and then forget about it. So I think that. But the final thing I think we need to do more is remind people that, and we've done this with getting the APR overturned, is that not only is this the place where we grow food, but remind the general public that this is the green lung. You trust us, the fact that we can grow good food, trust us that we can go and that this is where nature can recover. We can get numbers back again. So I think now we as Farming PLC and Conservationists PLC and NGOs need to stop trying to go and fight like ferrets in a sack for, let's go and point a finger at farmers, they're all gits, or we hate gamekeepers, or bloody lefty wildlife trust. Let's start all thinking together and actually having something where we say, this is how nature was recovering, now it's not, we can bring it back again. If you keep it with there, the general public will buy into it, and this government is desperate for some level of approval from the government, so I believe that if we can show them that this is where nature recovery is happening, the British public wants it, they'll probably go and bring back the SFI in a meaningful form. Because like I say, it's not all people are gits. I spoke with Terry Jeremy, MP Southwest Norfolk, old school Labour man. Oh, that's me. That's Terry Jeremy.
That's him. He's ringing.
And he won his Truss's old seat. And he said he was the most surprised person of anyone when he got it. But I spoke to him and I said to him, I said, you know, if we have this uncertainty, I said, you are not going to be able to achieve the legally binding levels of stop halting biodiversity decline that we've all signed up to. And he went, by God, you're right. He's a backbench MP, but he was brave enough and honest enough to abstain from the APR vote on Section 50 when they voted for that, and he actually gives a toss about wildlife. So wildlife is not a political issue. I think it's actually something where there's, whether you're, you know, I know Rupert Lowe, I know Terry Jeremy. Both of them actually do give a toss about yellow hammers and linnets. So therefore, I think you can go and get that and depoliticise nature. And I think we might go for it back. But making nature a political issue would be terrible. So, you know, that's another thing. But private finance, get the SFI back, show to DEFRA that the SFI was working and it can still work with sensible money, with grown-ups running the project.
Final question from Rob at the back.
Oh, my Lord.
Short question, please.
He's
and a
always-
short
he's
answer.
always-
It will be,
And then I've got some
extremely
quick-
short. Richard, I live in Wales. There's lots of walls. I've got an offspring who's quite keen on walling. How would you pitch to them to get into hedge laying? And a quick side question, do I always have to have a chainsaw rather than a bill hook?
Okay, last one first. You need both, because you cannot, unless you're a complete masochist, yes, you can go and use axes, but that's just for hobbyists. Chainsaws, brilliant. You know, that's why my back still works. But you will need a bill hook as well. How do they get into it? That is the absolute nub of the issue. We have... Okay. Okay, so you want to be in nature, right? You can't get more in nature than when you're in a hedge. And if you want to go and see instant gratification, there are very, very, very few opportunities in the natural world where you can do it. You lay a hedge and you stand back from your work, and aesthetically it's lovely, and you stand still for 3 minutes, and you will suddenly be descended on by long-tailed tits and blue tits and great tits and coal tits, and they'll all be picking over all the little insects that they've just found out that you've unearthed. And you immediately see that you've made a difference that will last. And each year you go back and you see that hedge has come that bit thicker and that bit more fruitful. And the farmer's going, this is great, you know, I'm now actually sequestering more carbon, and I'm getting rid of all that nasty nitrates that I put on the field. It's no longer going to my ditches, and Anglian Water are paying me an incentive for it. And I've got more yellowhammers than my neighbour. Ticks every box, and you are that one individual who has made that farmer happy, and a yellowhammer sing that bit loud.
3 quick fire questions, and then we're going to sign books, and we've got some parish notices before we go. What's the next book?
I've got 2 on the go. One is called Natural Allies. It's about how nature has grown to rely upon human intervention. And the other one is about looking into sporting art from the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and looking at how the backgrounds, not the horses, the hounds, and the huntsmen, are going to tell you anything, but look at the backgrounds. It's going to tell you about how our landscape may be changing, but it's just a repeating pattern.
Okay. And what are you reading now?
1913 by Florian Illis, which is what happened in 1913 across Europe, the year before the monstrosity of the First World War happened.
That sounds scarily depressing.
Yeah.
And the final question is, what's your favourite book?
Tarka the Otter by Henry Williams. Because he is such a flawed genius. He was not scared of showing all the brutality, cruelty of nature and humans. And he started his young life as a soldier. I started my young life as a soldier. I'm not a fascist. He became a fascist. But I find so much beauty in what he says, but also so much horrible realism. And nature is usually just horribly real. So, Tarka.
Thank you very much. We're going to hand over to Sheena, but please put your hands together, Richard. Thank you very much, Richard.